Welcome everyone to the show. Today we have a special guest, and it's Cameron Rowe. He's the founder of a company called Hover, and Hover is designing software for drones. And the software is doing everything from food delivery via drone, defense, which is somewhere new that you're going recently, and you also provided video capture software as well via drone for the Taylor Swift concert that was just in here through Toronto, Cameron. So welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Robin. Happy to be here.
And so you were tinkering with remote control toys when you were a kid. I think you had an early interest, right, in taking them apart, rebuilding them, adding new features. Tell me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I I think the first time I really started using it was just an RC toy that I got for Christmas. And there's a fun picture of me at like 4 years old or 3 years old, just at my grandparents, just booting around with this thing. From then on, it just became something I loved doing, from RC helicopters to toys to boats to kind of anything within that sphere. I would break it, take it apart, fix it, put it back together. Most of them ended up just being broken beyond repair, and because I didn't have the money to buy replacement parts, I would have to wait until another birthday or Christmas to get anything else. But it kind of evolved from there into my full-time job.
Um, that's really awesome. When I think of a drone, I think of someone in the middle of a park. I live near Arundel Park, flying a drone in the sky and it's recreational. But you have a bigger vision for drones in the future. And what's that vision? If we look out 20 years, what are we going to see?
We're going to see drones flying around all over the place, conducting a variety of things from public safety with police. Drones as a first responder is going to be a big thing. That's going to probably be one of the first main programs where drones are going to be flying around, probably comparable to the speed at which we're doing drone delivery. Drone delivery is going to be a big thing. I think the one thing to consider is big cities are going to have a harder time just because the buildings, and if you're trying to traverse a drone in between buildings, you now have GPS challenges with how the drone is going to operate, whether it is going to be operational going through those buildings. But primarily what we're seeing in the States is that drones are doing deliveries to suburban areas, which 90% of the states are suburban areas. And so if most people live in homes in a built out area, that is where most of the deliveries are going to be. However, I'm a still big believer that we're going to see drones that are going to be flying in our cities frequently and more often than they are now, which dozens are being flown every day. Sometimes you just don't miss them because once they get up 100 meters, you can't really hear them.
Yeah, and so how did the idea for Hover come about, though, right? Like what sparked the interest, and what gave you the thought that okay, this can be a business, this can be a startup that I want to grow. Walk me through it.
Yeah, absolutely. My grandfather actually was the one who kind of inspired it upon me a little bit. I think it was about second year university, and I was starting to kind of build these hardware solutions out a little bit more. I would build and crash these FPV drones, and he saw this as a potential opportunity to help with realtors. And he was the one who encouraged me and said, "Hey, you should take a look." I was in Kingston at the time, going to Queen's University, so started out up there, worked with a bunch of commercial real estate agents in Kingston. We started doing inspections more than just videography. And from there, it slowly progressed into doing infrastructure inspections, doing bridge inspections. We've done wind turbine inspections. We've worked with the RCMP to help with some of their investigations. We've worked with news. We've done Aston Martin commercials. We've done a whole suite of things that now that we've kind of gotten the expertise in building, flying, operating, and more importantly, the regulatory permission to do all of these different things, we kind of say, how can we take our expertise in this and kind of move forward? And that was where we had launched on the Toronto Islands our drone delivery startup. And so that was where we ended up partnering up with Pizza Pizza, and that's ongoing right now. But we're really excited because of the potential for the future for faster, more efficient delivery via drones as compared to people in a 2-ton vehicle.
So these are what you'd probably call like locked areas, right? Where it's hard to get food or anything else to the Toronto
Absolutely.
Island being the best case, right? Tell me more about that, the partnership with Pizza Pizza. You were literally flying boxes of pizza over to the island, yeah?
Yeah, we've done that before. I would say the Toronto Islands was primarily done in 2022 and 2023, where we were validating this concept that these locked markets have no alternative. And so when you're in a locked market, it doesn't just necessarily mean an island, but to give a definition of more of what that locked market means, it essentially just means an area in which it doesn't have the full access to certain services, companies, delivery methods that we may have living in downtown Toronto at Yonge and Bloor, for example. And so we like to target those areas because, first off, they're underserved. A lot of senior citizens live on the Toronto Island. So I thought, you know what? I'd spent a lot of time with my grandparents that summer. And as I mentioned, my grandfather was really key in starting this. So I was like, this could be something, even if it wasn't really doing much in the terms of scaling or growing, we would be able to at least help some senior citizens with groceries or prescriptions, for example. What we found, though, that there was a huge number of people that were on the Toronto Islands that never had access to any of the food delivery methods before. So they were thrilled to be able to say, order sushi, order waters, even just basic things that you normally would be able to walk to the store to get, you don't have access to. So Toronto Islands is a perfect use case and initial test bed. And so now we're currently identifying other markets across Canada and the United States where that same deployment makes sense. And that kind of leads us into what the other markets that we're looking at, like cargo ships, like other islands. And even if it's landlocked, what happens during traffic, where there's a lot of traffic taking place. And as you know from Toronto, you can sometimes take you an hour and a half, 2 hours to get across the city. And so that's something where a drone, even if a car is still possible, could still have access to this locked market and do it more effectively, even if it costs slightly more than what Uber Eats or DoorDash would charge.
I'm still amazed at the pizza, pie in the sky example. We're flying pies over the lake. Tell me about the customer experience. Like, do these people know that the drone is going to be delivering their pizza? Like they're part of the pilot program. Like,
Absolutely.
in the full rollout, then, how this actually happen? Like, are you on Uber and basically you're ordering a pizza? You're in a locked market. It'll notify you that, hey, it'll actually be a drone that'll be delivering this to you. I'm just trying to think about the future, right? And how does your software fit into all this?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to approach it. I think it's funny because the discussion, the sort of commentary that you brought up, very similar to the internal discussion of our team of, do we work with Uber Eats? Do we work with a DoorDash? Do we start our own? Do we go to, for example, Pizza? They did use DoorDash for a while, but they have a lot of their own private drivers and their own specific sort of delivery system that they use and their own drivers. So how that works is complicated and it would be different for every retailer. The benefit of having a large company to deal with is they have that power to be able to decide. So the way that we approach a pilot is to say, we will pick a location that has a high number of orders from one given store to help support that store, as opposed to having one person having to go back and forth and back and forth. You can kind of reduce that workload while at the same time, you also want it to make sense. So you don't want to pick something that's like, it's hard for us to do deliveries right now to a condo building. We've been testing out how to do that. There are methods and various ones, like in my condo building, people leave food in the lobby. Potentially you could do it a short walk outside in sort of a drop box. But there's also going to be the matter of, you have to have enough deliveries to warrant a drop box. But at the same time, if you don't have a drop box, how are you going to get enough deliveries? So it's a bit of a challenge to kind of do it. And the goal for us is simply, can we get deliveries done in a way that makes sense? And so when you simplify it down to that granular level, the Toronto Islands makes a lot of sense. Wherever we can do deliveries where it makes sense, that's where we're going to go. And whatever the method is, whether it is working with a company like Uber Eats, we're not right now, or even Skip the Dishes or one of the more local Canadian ones, that is something that we're always open to. I think we're just focused on getting right the safety, security, and ensuring your food gets there in a timely manner, and it's easy and effortless and affordable.
And package delivery. This could absolutely work for package delivery in the future, right? Where when you order something on Amazon or wherever it might be, maybe it's a small Shopify store, it'll actually be a drone that delivers that out to you.
Yep.
Not to your balcony on your condo because you said there's so many limitations and logistics. But tell me about package delivery. Do you have a pilot plan for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the Canada Post strike accelerated a lot of our
Mm-hmm.
clients' interest in that. You still have infrastructure challenges where you now need drones talking to one another. And who mandates that? Is that even something that can be done? Because current airspace regulations and traffic sort of management systems are very well established, but they're also designed specifically for aircraft. And so the challenges that the current Transport Canada and FAA, which is the United States version of it, have in figuring this out is that we're treating drones as aircraft. So we're all federally regulated. We get similar certifications for drone delivery. However, they're clearly different. And so when the regulations were first adapted in the mid 2010s for both Canada and the US, this current system that they created was the best sort of iteration of it. And they did a fantastic job balancing safety and as well allowing for these commercial drone operations to take place. If they wouldn't have a job. But at the same time, you definitely need things that are specifically built for these drone deliveries. And it's hard because a lot of time and money is going to have to go into that from the government standpoint. And so people are balancing, is now the right time? Do we implement this new framework early? How do they manage that? And so luckily, we have a really great proactive government that is putting these systems in place. And a lot of the times the people who work for the Transport Canada and FAA agency, they are people who formerly worked in aerospace. They were drone pilots themselves. So it's not as though they don't want this to move forward, but when you get into the nuances of it, how do you deal with it when it's close to an airport? For example, we flew really close to Pearson yesterday. There's a lot of steps involved in doing that. And when you're talking about a delivery where we might only be able to charge $10, how do you automate a lot of that system? Is it possible to? And the answer is obviously yes, but right now, a lot of it's manual. So it comes with its challenges that, like anything, you have to navigate and overcome. And that's a part of the reason why we raise a little bit of money to help supplement that and investigate which is the best use of our software in deploying it in certain scenarios.
And you recently supported the Taylor Swift concert tour, as I mentioned. And how did you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it logistically pretty straightforward. We have our pilots, we have our equipment. There's all sorts of nuances that I could get into. For example, you have to have different drone technology for if you think it's going to rain versus when it's not, because the waterproof drones are a little bit more expensive. They're the enterprise versions, excuse me. Then you have sort of things like, do we use our phones to hotspot and live stream? Do we use an HDMI out to a Dejero live streaming box, which is what the news providers will use when they're walking around town and they're live streaming to the news stations. And so there's a lot of considerations. We've done everything. This one, we actually wanted to work with Toronto Police to be able to do it because Toronto Police has a dedicated police van that they have all this equipment in there. And so instead of us saying, hey, we're going to worry about our equipment and renting all the relevant equipment and handling it, we're going to piggyback off of the infrastructure already existing to be able to generate a unique link that will live stream the view. And so we can do as many drones as realistically possible for this feed in the same way you can sort of do a multi-camera traffic integration thing that they're doing right now with Toronto traffic. But we said, you know what, let's start with 4 and we're going to do this. You saw one of the videos from one of them. And now you have 4 unique non-static camera feeds. And this is the key here. You can put up a bunch of cameras, but if they don't move or they're non-static, they're static, excuse me, which means they just stay in the same spot, they have a limited effectiveness other than to sort of say, yep, front and Bay Street, there's traffic there. Mm-hmm. And you're like, okay, well, that's great, but it's expensive for them to upgrade to have moving parts. Then the moving parts break down, you need to repair it. So the benefit of using a drone, especially during a large event like that, is you can move it in different scenarios. So you can go 2 blocks down and you can see, and you have the ability to do this, especially in the interest of public safety. When you have 40,000 Swifties, 50,000 Swifties there, you want to make sure that they're safe. And that's something that Toronto Police did a fantastic job doing. And so our only job is to support those operations. And we're really doing it with that. Like, we were working out of the TPS van that was there. And so there's a whole bunch of, then layered on top of that, applications that can be derived from it. For example, using automation to fly the drones in pre-planned routes. You can use computer vision and AI to then detect certain things in the feed. There's a lot of different applications that can be done that we're involved with. I would say the biggest thing is our expertise is in creating that software, but also in the operations. So we're uniquely placed. A lot of companies can create the software, but they can't actually deploy it or test it. We can do both. And so that means we're called upon frequently to actually implement and fly the drones, even in airspace that is shut down for regular sort of hobbyists that are trying to fly their drone around. And so we were operating next to where Toronto Police had a jamming system, and they're white labeling our drones. So we have these relationships and this experience that means we're able to kind of be uniquely placed to do it. We're not really just drone operators, but we also just aren't software providers. And I think that's a really good spot to be in.
So food delivery, package delivery, surveillance, as you just mentioned, with the Swift concert. There's also the opportunity of defense drones. So
Yep.
walk me through that opportunity.
Yeah, so an important part when you're conducting a drone delivery is having something called a detect and avoid system. So where this all got started was we had said we need to build a custom detect and it's called a DAA system essentially. And so having the ability to detect and avoid automatically other drones in the airspace that potentially come in your way is a step closer towards the vision of having drones flying around and not having an issue because they're all communicating with one another. So the step that we're in right now is having the drone have radar, LiDAR, ultrasonic sensors, and a camera feed, a 360 camera on it that is able to identify other drones or obstacles. It could be birds, planes, or really anything else that is potentially in its way using computer. It uses a lot of different sort of complex systems. The easiest way to describe it is we're using sensor fusion to be able to take all of those sensors, compile everything into something that is able to detect whether or not what's in front of us is actually a drone. If it is, then the path planning algorithm will route us around it, or if it determines it needs to land or go back to where it launched from, it will do so. And so when we had created that, we had realized because we've now done over 12,000 successful deliveries, there's an opportunity for us to use that trained and improved system in other applications. And so hearing people talk about how drone detection is a massive problem for not just military, but commercial use, Hover Defense was born. And so we modeled out a solution that would be able to detect. This was in partnership with various other companies. Teledyne FLIR had supported us by giving us one of their cameras. And it's the highest quality 360 camera you can find. But nowadays, we're just using Insta360s, which, to be honest, are really affordable. And so we're able to implement these systems in a cost-effective way that isn't how expensive the Lockheed Martins of the world are charging, but that still gets the job done. And that is important when you're talking about you need low-cost systems that can be deployed quickly that can still be effective. You can't use a $5 million radar system in the middle of the forest in Ukraine when they're trying to detect when drones are flying by. Things just break down. Everything's wet. It's cold. The truck bringing it gets jammed, or an FPV system that has onboard compute that has no radar, then it blows it up and your $1 million investment is gone. So people don't realize how difficult this is. And so we're trying to have an easier solution that is more effective for places like NFL stadiums, prisons, who are traditionally using counter-drone measures, but it's all radio-based. And so this is where we see our solution fitting in very nicely. And we have a lot of really cool things that we've been working on to then have a closed loop system, which actually shoots the drone down. So some more revenues from the other operations like the Taylor Swift concert, like other areas, can support this development so that we can also not have to be beholden to VCs. We can simply grow at our own pace as a company doing great revenue for various services.
You mentioned 12,000 successful deliveries. Did I hear that right?
Yep.
That can't be 12,000 pizzas to Toronto Island. So what
No,
else comprised those, successful deliveries? Like what were
that
you
was
delivering?
cumulative over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
We've done many, like we've been up to Thunder Bay and we've done insulin drone delivery with a larger drone over a longer distance. That was a 35-kilometer delivery. And so the way that I describe it to people, because it can get overwhelming the number of applications and things that has been done, is we are subject matter experts within the drone space. However, because we have these certifications, it doesn't really matter what type of drone we're using or in what circumstances we are deploying those drones. The main thing that matters is how we are using that data in order to make life better, safer, or cheaper for our customers.
So this is important. These certifications, right? These licenses. It's not like anyone can just go out and apply to do what you do. How many companies do you think hold the same level of certifications and licenses that you do at Hover?
And I would say companies could potentially do this. It's not as though it's impossible because we had done it. It took us a couple months when we first had launched in the summer of 2022. We were one of, I believe, 6 or so that had this cargo delivery license that was given to us from the CTA, which is just essentially Canada's transportation agency. That was something that we were really surprised about. And when we looked through the list, because it's all public information, Air Canada Cargo, it was some random sort of remote cargo delivery, a lot of the times that actually was something people were planning to do with autonomous drones that are larger scale. And so we were kind of in a unique position where we would say, while this license is a barrier, not only what we're doing applies, but we have the same license that Air Canada Cargo, this massive company. And that's a pretty exciting thing to be able to claim and talk to people about, where it's like, for a while, we didn't realize it's not that we're on the same level as them, but our insurance requirements, our personnel requirements, our publishing requirements, all of these things, we're beholden to the same regulations as Air Canada Cargo for this specific license. Of course, for their aircraft, there are different ones, and it is much, much more complicated for what they're doing. But it was a cool feeling to sort of say, we can actually still get it. And I would say it isn't impossible to start up. The challenge is actually making something sustainable. And I think that has been the real trick. If you have $10,000, $20,000, you could probably go get a license yourself. But then it's like, what drone do you use? Where do you deploy? Who do you partner with? How often are you doing this? How do you get customers? What application do you use? Like, we didn't even launch an app. We launched a text-based service. And this was before ChatGPT. This was like 8 months before. So that was a pain in the butt to be able to make an interface that would be a chatbot effectively. But amazing experience. We ended up launching and had amazing success. And now cumulatively doing those 12,000 deliveries, it's fantastic how much we've learned from them, and just having the reps in that gives us strength and improves, again, our DAA system and all of our models.
Cameron, who else in Canada can say they've completed 12,000 successful deliveries? Seriously, who else?
I think Drone Delivery Canada, but I think the thing about, and I really like them, a lot of their deliveries are not necessarily to paid customers. They're sort of trials in-house where we'll just test it. I think the key distinction here is those deliveries are ones that we've done to customers who have paid us for that. And so I think that is a very big distinction. In the States, there's a number of company, Amazon Prime, I don't think has hit 10,000. We had actually done more than Amazon in 2022 when we went to the International Las Vegas drone. It was a commercial UAV expo. We had met with some of these companies, and one of them had raised like $100 million from Walmart. This was Drone Up. And the founder was like, how many deliveries have you guys done? You guys hit like 2,000 this year? And they had done like 200 in trials. And so it was one of those things where we're like, we had $0 in funding and they had 100 million. Their booth was massive. It was like 3,000 square feet of this booth. And it was a testament to like, wow, very interesting that they were like, it's just a different approach. And so those companies have done very well, but it's also the type of thing they would have to come into Canada and get the same regulatory approvals that we have. And so we actually have a strength in already having those. And that gives us, even as a smaller company, a bit more leverage to come to the table to Zipline, for example, who I absolutely love those guys. I've been trying to get them to license some of their hardware to us for a long, long time. But I spent 2 hours with the CTO, Keenan, in person in 2023 in their headquarters. And that was where I started thinking more about the technology and how they're implementing it. It's a fantastic sort of opportunity for me to expand not only my network, but also just my learnings and the things that I learn and the people that I meet. It's been the best experience of my life the past 2.5 years in taking on this challenge.
Huge challenge, and we need more people like you in Canada. Absolutely. Like I'm thinking, are you self-taught? Like there isn't a course in university that teaches you how to, program drone software, right? So
You're
how did you
gassing me
do
up
it?
too much. It's a lot of Googling, to be honest. It's not like there's no degree that you do. You just
Yeah.
have to have a simple yet in-depth understanding of what the system is. And then the more that you do, it seems so obvious of like, oh, the drones need software to communicate with one another. Okay, great. Where do you go from there? And it's like by actually doing the deliveries and kind of eating the shit and going through it and being like, what the hell? We need to talk to the parks supervisor when we're doing this. Like, what the hell do they care? And then we had to call. I spent like 2 weeks just calling people in the city of Toronto. Do we need a business license to do drone delivery? No. Do we need a bit like just repeating the same? I don't know how to, like, people will be like, I don't know. I'll transfer you to this person. I don't know. And oh, we're on vacation for 4 weeks. Sorry, we get back to like it. There's no real way other than just doing it and calling around. And then eventually we get in writing, we don't need a business license. So then when the park supervisor comes and says, oh, you guys need a license, we say, we've actually spent 2 weeks calling. Here's a letter from like one of the deputy, like assistant to the mayor that basically say, hey, we confirmed that you don't need it. And this was I actually met John Tory on stage and invited him to come along. This is all before everything that happened here, but it was people like this. It's very exciting, and so
Yeah.
people want to support you. And I think as long as you are preemptive about things and respectful and say, listen, we don't want to piss people off. This is our plan. Can you tell us what we need? If we need a license, we'll pay for it. If we don't need a license, awesome. So that's kind of how we approached it. And as long as you're thorough with it, you can just do things like that and people will go out of their way to help you.
Tell me about your team on day one. Like, where did you source the people to support you in your vision, to help you build the software and test and commercialize?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the software that was being built was me. So I had to learn a little bit more, like which coding languages to use, which systems, even like what application do you use to code? It's like it's if you're not technical, you don't really know these things intuitively, you know. Whereas if I said, "Hey, can you build this shed?" You'd be like, "Okay, I know exactly. I could go to Home Depot. I could pick out the things. I roughly know what to do." But it's not as scary as you think because when you also have people who are subject matter experts, as long as like my role is not necessarily to just do everything, it's to guide people and bring together a team. So our only requirement for some of the pilots that helped us was, do you have a license to fly? And are you capable of having some sort of customer service interactions? And honestly, I was so brutally honest with the initial post where I was like, there's going to be long hours. Like we would spend 10 hours on the Toronto Island and it would take us an hour and a half to set up and an hour and a half to take down. And it just was the longest days ever. But when you're honest with people and you say, this is what we're going to have to do to succeed, if you're willing to do it, here's what it's going to be. It actually helps kind of filter out because a lot of the times people will see a job interview or the job interviewers are going to kind of be sneaky about it. And they're not going to say what the pay is. They're not going to say what the roles are. Then after 10 interviews, you go, oh, this actually isn't a good fit versus just reading a piece of paper. Not for me. And so we really only had, I think, like 15 applications for pilots. And then we hired 3 for that summer. So we didn't really have much like when one called in sick, we had to sometimes pause operations because we didn't have the funds to be able to do it. But that was that's kind of the reality of what it is. I pulled all my money out for my TFSA to pay for the drones and their salaries, and you kind of just go from there. And for the maybe 2 years, I never took a salary, and it just you kind of just go through it, and then eventually you hit these really great milestones where people like the Techstars crew say, "We really like what you're doing." And I'm a solo founder, so the traditional VC method, put together a team, split equity 50-50 and grow, it's a little different than that. But when you kind of have that, I think at least what attracted them was the fact that I'm kind of just so in love with what I'm doing and so passionate about it. I brought one of our employees who, he's really one of my best friends, is how he got involved, to the investor meeting, which is somewhat atypical. People might sort of not be like, why are you bringing this guy who has no equity stake in the company? But because of the dynamic and hearing his stories of him working with us and seeing the camaraderie of like someone who has no equity is talking to me in a way and I'm being receptive, I think it's almost like I'm coachable. And that was something that I think I had to learn how to be in a way. That was something that gave them the confidence. So honestly, I think I made the right call in bringing this individual to that meeting, which that's a lot of the times people will invest based off of if they like you.
Mhm.
And as long as you're competent, which I demonstrated that I was, a lot of it is more of like, do I trust this person with the capital that I was assigned to trust and me being the investor, for example. So that's something that I'm sure if you're interviewing a lot of sort of finance people as well, a lot of the times it's their money, but it's not their money. And so people want just someone that they can connect with that say, this person isn't going to just disappear with the cash. They're going to do their best to grow. They understand there's a risk profile associated with that cash, and drone delivery is a very hard thing to crack, but if you win very big.
You absolutely have skin in the game, right? Like you're
Yeah.
aligned to your customers, your investors. You bootstrap the business. I'm sure you
Yep.
continue to do so. Like the example of pulling money out of the TFSA. Um, Tell me what doors opened as a result of being on Dragon's Den for you.
It's actually quite funny because I I've been telling people that I'm not going to be negative because I think sometimes it's easy to get. I post on LinkedIn sometimes, and it's like, oh well, the Canadian dollar is dropping. Like I don't want to be like a Fox News just talking about all the negative shit going on. I want to be like a positive guy. I want to focus on the good things that are happening. But at least for Dragons Den, I laugh because it it was very much something that I think I've posted on like maybe I posted 20 times on LinkedIn, and I've gotten more views on the LinkedIn post than my episode got views. And
Wow.
so I don't want to discredit Dragon's Den, but I think entrepreneurs should understand that it's a TV show. It's a TV show. It's okay that you go on there wanting money, but there is zero any commitment that you see on this show. About 90% of them fall through because either the founder lies, they make up shit on TV. You can just say whatever you want. Nobody's checking any of the things that I was saying up there. And so the problem is if you are a super successful entrepreneur, many of them are really fantastic. Like Wes Hall, amazing entrepreneur, done very, very well for himself. They are investing in the same way that I sort of mentioned earlier, where they want to like you, they want to get to know you. It matters less of like if you have a ton of traction because this is an early stage investing. If you're a VC, this would be the equivalent of like a pre-seed check is what they're writing. And they don't have the risk tolerance because it's all their cash. They do not have the same valuation multiples, and that just is like what your company is worth. They'll look at your revenue. And so if you say you have 250,000 in revenue and you're worth 2.5 million, that's 10x revenue multiple. Very few service-based companies or CPG or like if you have a cool deodorant or t-shirt company, it's going to be really hard to sell people on a 10x revenue multiple. But if you're software or if you're something like drone delivery, like Zipline raised on like an 80x revenue multiple. So they had like 25 million in revenue and raised at like $3 billion. So those are things to consider where it's like there's lots of VCs that have cash. Dragon's Den is not necessarily the one that you're going to raise a big round off of, but it gets you in front of the public. It gets you more well-known. What it really did is, first off, it was something I really wanted to do. And I think life is short. You kind of want to just do things because you think they're fun and exciting. And second off, it gave me more validation within the Canadian ecosystem as sort of, it's like a bit of a check mark. And you don't have to have it to be able to be taken seriously, but when you have it among with 40 other things, you kind of develop this profile of an entrepreneur. And I think it just was a really great experience, like preparing for it, being refined, practicing being under pressure. I had run the Toronto Waterfront Marathon in May, the day before, I believe, or 2 days earlier. And so I remember I was standing up there for an hour and a half, which they cut down to like 6 minutes, by the way. So they cut most of it out. And my legs are like shaking and I'm like, oh my God, I don't want my legs to shake because they're going to just like zoom in on that. And so that's what I mean by reality TV. It was amazing opportunity. Like I was super happy to have been offered something by Michelle Romanow, but the valuation was not good. And we would have taken a 50% haircut on our valuation. Even I already had lowered it to make that offer. And I think that's kind of the reality. It just wasn't a great fit. And so that was why we had walked away. But super lucky to have been on there. I think it's something very few people experience. And I have so much gratitude for being picked and having that experience.
And put you on the map, right?
Totally.
It gave you the encouragement to say, okay, I was picked to be on Dragons Den. I'm out there. It's something to put on the resume, and you can share the clip with other venture capital companies. So I'm curious, who was the first venture capitalist to take a chance to say, listen, Cameron, I like your idea. We're going to invest.
It would have been Techstars.
Techstars. So tell me more about that journey and how did that come about?
They were great. I think it's funny because they also invested in Zipline. And so the reason I kind of bring them up frequently is because I know.
And what's Zipline exactly? If you can explain for the audience what Zipline does.
So the Zipline started out doing various robotics tasks. They essentially moved after a couple of years into drone delivery within certain African communities of blood. And so they had an amazing, amazing reception because the infrastructure is not there in Rwanda, for example, where they have a big sort of presence where there are many hospitals that get filled. Problem is not necessarily the hospitals, it's the supply chain for the hospitals. So if you have a pregnant mother who comes in from some community that's close to the hospital but far away from a major distribution point, how does this mother get blood infusions if while they're giving birth, they need a lot of blood? And so if you need something like that urgently, you have to get something going. And what they previously did is they had people on but the mopeds. And so they would, motorbikes would come with blood going hours across a dirt road that sometimes, there's a flood, the road's closed. Okay, now the blood's gone bad. That's in a refrigerated
pitch black
containers.
and at night, early morning. Yeah.
people aren't going to go. They're just going to say, sorry, there's a
Yeah.
storm. I can't go do it. So you could stock up on blood, but what happens if two or three mothers then need to give birth? And so the reason I'm using the sort of mothers giving birth is because that example, they had shown a significant, you can Google this, it's a massive reduction in maternal deaths in these
Wow.
hospitals
That's great.
directly because of their blood drone delivery. And so
Yeah.
that's the like, they were also able to raise that much money because of the medical aspect of it and how that does usually carry higher valuations. But now that they've kind of validated that and they're doing it in various locations around the world, they're building out a new system that's going to be doing food delivery, which arguably is going to be a competitor to us. But I think it's something that the industry, it's so small. Like
Yeah.
nobody's really ever had a drone delivery unless you're living in very specific areas, like in Dallas Fort Worth. So
Yeah.
it's the type of thing where we really want to work together, and they've done a really good job of setting the tone of that. And I was just some random guy from Canada who they heard we'd been doing some deliveries, and the CTO, guy's a billionaire on paper, spends
Okay.
2 hours with me in the middle of the day. And so it's not, that's like a pretty big thing where I go, wow, like thank you for doing this to me.
And who's the
Uh,
CEO of Techstars, you said?
Not Techstars, excuse me, of Zipline.
Zipline. Okay.
And so this was Keenan Weirobeck, a
Okay.
fantastic guy. He's the CTO, and the Techstars is a larger organization, and that was sort of the long-winded way of bringing it back to Techstars of saying they saw what we were doing, and I
Yeah.
think it triggered a bit of their, hey, we've already invested within companies similar to this. This
Yeah.
is within our investment ethos. We presumably like Cameron, and so we want to support him and the team as they grow within Canada and the United States.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Congratulations. And
thank
and,
you.
and if you're piloting in the future in the Greater Toronto area, specifically Mississauga, I'll put my hand up, okay, for pizza delivery.
It's a good
Um,
location for it.
yeah. Okay, so this is super interesting. So you're all about, continually testing the service, broadening out what you do. But you're commercialized already. You're a revenue generating startup, right?
Yep.
You're already bringing money in. And so what do you see as the biggest piece of the pie in the future? What would be like the 80% of revenue, and where do you generate it?
I I think that's very hard to kind of quantify. How I look at 80% of our revenue, I think it would be within licensing of our software. And so I think because we are so dominant in how many that we've done and we are so intentional about improving that software, instead of just, we're not here to make 20 bucks off a delivery, we're here to improve the software. That software can be implemented within other aircraft, EV tools, a whole variety of drones. And so I think that likely will be where much of it goes. We really are a software business as much as people sort of say we do services. The software layer on top is what carries us. The autonomy is why we get chosen for many of these bids that potentially other companies who have experience in this space could also do. It's because of our software layer.
Amazon's working on technology internally, obviously, to deliver packages. What's Uber working on internally?
They had a pilot system going for a while. I would say we're actually not necessarily trying to focus on this package delivery market.
Hmm.
That is one where like billions and billions of packages are delivered annually. I actually think that's a harder market to penetrate because the systems they have in place are so ingrained in society. We have distribution hubs all over the place. We've got dozens across Toronto. Pearson has dealt with Air Canada Cargo, DHL, UPS, all these companies coming in and doing this. There's a whole industry that's being supported. Much of it is unionized now. We're seeing that with Canada Post. So for us to go and try to compete with this very uh, entrenched and established company and sort of ecosystem is not something where I see us actually being able to compete. However, targeting something like food or grocery delivery with the drones is something I think we are able to kind of disrupt. And so that is where I see, because that's still so small, that's going to start to grow as autonomy increases, autonomous vehicles. We're going to see a lot of that. I actually, honestly, in cities, I actually think it's probably better to have people on electric bikes delivering food than it is to have drones. I really think places like Mississauga, Brampton, Milton, sort of the areas that have a little bit more sprawl, it will be key though to have drone delivery in those areas.
Absolutely. So do you see an exit in the future for yourself? Is it selling to to a bigger corporation? Is it IPOing? What do you envision, Cameron? What do you want for Hover?
It's so early to say. I think as a founder, you kind of have to be open for everything. You kind of just take things as they come. A big thing, though, that is something that Techstars instilled upon me, my mentors have instilled upon me, is just look for market pull. Where is the strongest market pull, and what will that mean? Does that mean it's better to work with Zipline or Uber Eats or Amazon? If it is, then investigate that. We have connections with people in all of those spaces, but I really just think that I love what I do. And I think it'd be very hard for me to kind of change that up and go do something else. But you never know. I think it's just hard to say. It's if I knew the answer to that, I think I probably wouldn't even happen. So we're gonna see in
You're
the
just
next
completely
couple of
focused on
years.
building, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Just building and just proving out the technology and the use cases. So, um, having been building a startup, you understand more than a lot of people the tech scene, but the venture capital scene in Canada. I can only assume that Techstars is American. Is that right?
They
Okay.
are, but they have a national presence across the
Did
world.
did you find that reception in Canada from venture capital wasn't as great as it was from the American
Oh,
counterparts?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Let's talk about
absolutely.
it.
I talk about this a little on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I'm not very like one of the benefits I think about being kind of working on your company, you can just say whatever you want. And I think I can just share how I feel and I'm not worried about alienating people because I'm just sharing my opinion and I'm sharing anecdotes. And if people get upset at that, then they get upset at that. It is what it is. And they probably weren't a right investor or employee anyways, if that's what you're getting upset about. So I have a lot of beef with people like BDC in Canada where they're doing debt for entrepreneurs and they're making it personally guaranteed. I think that's horrendous. That's a terrible deal if you're a founder. And it's just like, why would you ever do that? Because they'll literally make you go bankrupt and it'll screw you over. The whole point of what we're doing is to have a high risk tolerance. And if you now take that away and say, founders, if you have a kid in a house, we're gonna take your kid's university money, we're gonna take your house from you, we're gonna take your car, and you're gonna be broke and penniless if you don't pay us back these terms. That's not, they call themselves the entrepreneur's bank. That's not what they are. I think VCs are better in Canada, but you still get to this funny point where VCs want to be early enough that they get a substantial stake in something that is worth very little so that once you hit 100 million, 500 million, $2 billion in valuation, that stake that they had purchased at that small stage is worth a lot. The problem is if you go too early, you're now investing in just an idea with zero validation and you're going to lose all the money that you invest. So there's this fine line and typically VCs have these sort of thesis or ethos that they follow and they stick to it. Canadian VCs are just more risk averse. And so they really are going to write checks into companies that you have a couple 100,000 in revenue. It doesn't mean you can't get that, but it just means typically the companies and the founders that get those checks are established. So it means like you worked at Shopify for 10 years as a PM and you developed this super hyper niche. And so then you're going to start this company that has it. At that point though, you kind of like, it's just the reason I say they're very risk adverse is because it's very rare for you to hear about stories in Canada of like 18-year-olds raising a couple $1 million to go tackle this really big problem. Happens all the time in the States. The main thing that I sort of break it down to is people are richer there and they have a higher risk tolerance. Like when Canadians get rich, what do? They buy a house. Then they buy a second apartment and they rent it out. Then what do? They buy a cottage. That's it. And then they buy like mutual funds or something like that's it. That's all they do.
Unproductive assets, right?
Yeah,
That there's no innovation.
no.
There's no
When
research and
American
development.
founders get rich, they start new companies. They're like, I'm going to put half my money in this shit coin that I might become a trillionaire. And it's like that mentality is not something Canadians have. And so it's like that. It sounds silly, but it honestly is the reality of it. It's like people are risk adverse here. They would much rather not lose what they have than to 100x and to be something better. And the problem is they're kind of right in that you probably will lose it if you do risky things, but then you never have anyone who's worth $100 billion. It just doesn't happen in Canada. And then all the super risky people say, why would I want to be in Canada where no founders are like me? They go to San Francisco. They go to New York. And so it's like, it's really great to be a rich person in the States. I'm not that yet, but I can see why people leave, and the brain drain has been real for the past 20, 30 years. I just advise people, like, it's okay to live in Canada and grow your business here, but just go down to the States and spend time there so you see what is out there. We had an investor who, so wonderful. We met them, we played pickleball with them. They said, yeah, we'll write a check in you. No pitch deck,
Wow.
no data room.
Wow.
And these aren't small checks either. These are
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of dollars in USD as well, which founders, you have to raise in USD. And so it's like, you really only get that from people who are wealthy and they trust you. And that feels so great as a founder to have someone trust you that much because it validates you. And so I think it's just important to realize those people exist, and firms who are going to make you have 12 meetings with them and rip apart everything about your business and write a financial model 12 years in the future. It's like, what are you talking about? They're all wrong. 100% of the time, the financial models are wrong. So it's like, if you're in pre-seed and somebody's telling, hey, write a financial model, like the problem is if you're a younger founder, it's hard to kind of do that because the VC is viewed as this wealthy, rich person who kind of has power. So my advice is just flip the dynamic. View it as something like you are selling your company, a piece of your company to this investor. If they are not a good fit, do not sell it to them. And so as long as that is the case and you kind of can use social dynamics in your favor to kind of create hype. That's why I tell founders to post all the time as well on LinkedIn, because that's scalable and it generates hype of, like you were mentioning, hey, you see me come up on LinkedIn. That's a really good thing. And people will see your name multiple times, and it creates familiarity. It creates confidence. You're not supposed to really be pushing hard. You're supposed to be pulling them towards you. Like I said before, create the pull and feel what that is. Like create the push so that you know what the market is pushing you towards. And you're not having to do everything yourself. People are coming to you and booking calls and doing these things. So I just think it's important, talking candidly, for people to realize that and go travel to the States. Like, you'll just see what a US dollar that's 40% more than Canada is, and the network effect of having 10 times the population has done. Like, it is quite incredible the amount of wealth that's there, and it's important that people know that exists.
What's the big contract that you really want to win, Cameron? Like, what's going to push this company forward? I'm sure there's one that you have in your mind, right?
Yes.
Where maybe it's partnering with a company or like
We just had
tell me
a
what it is.
2-hour meeting this morning talking about it with them, but I don't want to share too much about it. It's definitely focused on the commercial side of it, where the deliveries are worth substantially more than a $10 pizza. And so I think that doing that reliably, when you're talking about heavier weight or larger systems, there are many, many systems in place that need these deliveries, but we're really focused on we need to validate, we need to bid on these contracts and win. And I think we have a great shot. Like, we have experience doing these types of deliveries.
Fingers crossed, my
so
friend,
I appreciate it.
that you win the big contract. Can you give us a clue or a hint what this could be?
No, because I wanted to, like, I don't
Okay.
I don't want anything to impact it.
We'll wait and see on LinkedIn, okay? When
you'll
the big
see it on
announcement's made
LinkedIn.
by you.
You'll
Okay,
see
so
it on
people need to go
LinkedIn.
follow Cameron on
Please.
LinkedIn, Cameron Rowe, ROWE. Last question. I know that you're helping to organize the upcoming, I think you call it Fresh Founders.
Yep.
On Tuesday of next week. It's a meetup with other founders in Toronto, and you touched on that. It's important to build an ecosystem of encouragement in Canada. Tell me more about Fresh Founders.
Yeah, certainly. So this was started by some of the OG Shopify guys like Harley, Toby, and some other Ottawa-based founders, where they would essentially get together once a week or so, and they would just shoot the shit. They would work together. I think they did it from a coffee shop. This was back when I was probably like 9 or 10. And so this was a long time ago. And they've sort of since moved past this, but the ethos of that and the brand has remained the same. And Fresh Founders has come to be, it's a small fund. They make investments, but primarily what they're doing is they're supporting the entrepreneurial community in Canada. And so what that looks like is we host events. I'm the community lead for Toronto, where we have no strings attached. The only thing we ask for is some level of commitment in terms of showing up and accountability, because we don't want people to kind of drop in and drink and eat for free and leave. But you're meant to just spend time with other founders. There's no agenda. You can talk about whatever you want. You're just supposed to spend time with other founders who get it, who are in the trenches with you, who understand how stressful it is to have 3 months of runway left before you got to fire everybody, and who have employees whose livelihoods depend on them making decisions to pay the bills, to do this, those are real decisions that people have to deal with, and you see the consequences of those decisions every day. And so I think that's a very stressful place to be in. And if you succeed, of course, everyone celebrates you, but there are many, many people who fail. And so just having the ability to say, here is how we can support one another, whether it's through questions, problems, introductions, whatever it is. And that is essentially what we're looking for, is to have founders who come in and say, hey, we're gonna have some food, some drinks, and we'll cover all that for you guys, and just have a good time, have a good attitude, and that's what we're hosting next Tuesday.
That's super positive. I
Yeah.
know you have an important call you have to jump to soon, but you know I have a very strong feeling the best is yet to come.
Thank you.
It's so great to meet you. Thanks for the
It's
conversation.
nice
I
to
think
meet you
everyone
too.
needs to be following Hover, and they need to follow you on LinkedIn and other social media to see what the heck Cameron is up to next. I'm sure
Thank you.
you're gonna have the 20,000 successful deliveries on your belt shortly, and
Appreciate that.